we streaming? And this is also being taped too, right? So, anyway, I want to welcome everybody to this kickoff meeting regarding broadband. I do want to make a couple of statements. Actually, my name is Mark DeLayden. I'm the one of the commissioners. I'm actually the board chair this year. I represent District 3, which is Eastern St. Michael at Otsego, a small part of Dayton. To my right is Commissioner Wetter, who lives in Rockford Township and represents Western St. Michael, Rockford Township, Rockford, and Hanover. Did I miss any?
Albertville.
And Albertville, sorry. Anybody from Albertville? Okay.
Yeah.
The survey, we got a lot of different comments on it. And one of the things that people were very adamant about government getting involved in internet. Wright County has no intention of becoming an internet provider. That is not what that question was related to. It was supposedly more for matching grants or subsidizing some of the current ISFPs, using some of our ARP funding. So rest assured, this government, county government, is not going to get into becoming an internet supplier. Not while I'm around. The guy in the back, well, I should say the dog in the back, and then the guy standing next to the dog is our IT department head. So he wants to make sure that we have good internet for us also. It's very important, along with security and that sort of stuff. Elizabeth is our project manager for working on this whole project. And Jack Maytum, right?
Smith. Smith works too.
Smith, okay. Jack is from Design 9, who is a contractor we hired. And this is all they do. They're experts in this, and I'm going to let him toot his own horn. But he helped us put a lot of this stuff together, and that should be it. Again, this is being live streamed, so if you want to text anybody, tell them to go there to their slow internet, and they can kind of watch it in and out.
Eventually.
Or it's also being recorded, so it'll be available in the future too. Elizabeth, do you have anything?
I don't. I'll turn over to Jack just to kind of give an update on where things are at.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, my name is Jack Maytum, and I'm a broadband analyst with Design 9. We are engineering consultants. We specialize strictly on broadband. You can tell I'm the consultant because I have the tie. I'm either that or a copy or repair person, one of the two, but tonight I am the consultant. So I agree completely with what you said. We don't expect that the county would be an internet service provider. So then the question is, well, why are we doing a study? Why don't we just have the providers provide more broadband? Well, people have been asking that question for 100 years, or at least phone company since AT&T was the monopoly putting in the telephone lines. Things really haven't improved much, even though they were supposed to improve about 20 years ago, but the breakup of AT&T, but here we are, and we're still struggling, and I think the last 2 years have pretty much shown everybody that we have a severe shortage of broadband access, and we realize how important that is now. So one of the reasons that you want to do a study like this is because the providers, even though they may not be here tonight, are certainly paying attention. And if they think that the county might somehow get involved in broadband, well, then they better start paying attention. They better start talking to the county and their representatives and their customers and show them how they're doing better in providing better broadband. And I can give you an actual experience of that tonight, because about 4 years ago, we did a study in Meeker County, and I made a number of visits there and presentations. We did a report similar to this, and at the last meeting, I remember it distinctly because it was in January, and at the wrap-up of the presentation, a gentleman stood up in the back and said that he was the president of Meeker Co-op, and on the basis of the study that we had just completed, he thinks that his co-op ought to be in the business of providing broadband to residents of Meeker County. They own the telephone poles. They had their own specific needs with meters and transformers, et cetera. So he had volunteered at that meeting to do that. And in fact, he's here right now. Steve Cosbell, why don't you stand up, because I think they'll be seeing a lot more of you. He is with Meeker Co-op, and they are offering not only fiber services, but also wireless services. And not only in Meeker County, but you're already offering them here in the county. So he's the man that you want to get a hold of and that you want to know, because he is a scrappy competitor who is going to give the other incumbents like AT&T and Verizon and Comcast and Charter and all those people. So he's not the only one, because Elizabeth and I have managed about 30 Zoom calls over the past month, because I was supposed to come here about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and because of COVID, we put it off, and we decided to hold as many online conferences as we could online. And we held about 16 Zoom conferences with various internet service providers in the county. And they were very forthcoming, I felt. They talked to us. That's a good sign. They told us a little bit about what they had done and what their intentions were, because as the commissioner said, we don't want to be in the business, we don't think the county should be in the business of actually selling internet services to residents in the county. But we do think that there may be a way for the county to help the existing providers offer better services to more people. So that's our job, is to first of all find out what sorts of broadband assets already exist in the county that are publicly and privately owned, both wireline, like fiber and cable, also wireless, fixed wireless, what towers exist, how many wireless internet service providers there are in the county, what their intentions are. And in addition to that, we are doing a survey. In fact, we have completed a survey, which is really the focus of tonight's meeting. We have done a survey of all the households in the county. We have had both an online and a mail service, mail. And we got a total of 5,461 responses, which represents 11%. There are about roughly 34,000 households in the county. So we consider that to be a very good response. We've noticed that over the past year or so, the responses really have been climbing upward. In one case, we got a 15% response, and we think that's directly related to the impact of COVID, where people realize they need to get better broadband because of kids having to go to school remotely and also work from home. So it's unfortunate that we had to go through this exercise, but I suppose in the long run it's going to be good if we realize that if we do better broadband now, we'll be ready next time to be able to handle a similar circumstance much better. So I'm just going to go through a few of the high points of the survey, and then I'm going to explain what else we're going to be doing with the study, when we might finish it, and what we can expect to get after that. So as it says here, 86% of the respondents are interested in faster, more reliable internet service. 41% of respondents are very dissatisfied. I heard a number of comments tonight that people think it really ought to be higher than that, but at least on the basis of our survey, that's what we got so far. So that's what we're reporting. So I'm just going to go through a few other points. Then I'll ask if there are any questions that you want to discuss further about this. 92% of the respondents said they believe the county government should help facilitate better broadband. Now, I think if you ask them outright if they want to buy their internet directly from the county, most of them would probably say no, but they do think there's a role for government in helping with better broadband. So when we do our analysis of what broadband assets exist in the county, we will identify where gaps might be. For instance, if there's a certain neighborhood that needs to get a core network put in other words, some conduit with fiber in it, and I have some visual aids here which will help a little bit explain what I'm talking about. So let me just get those passed around. This is a section of fiber optic cable. There are actually 144 strands of fiber in this. Typically now what goes into a core in a municipal area would be 288 strands. And I actually have a picture of me holding a section of cable that's not much bigger than this that has 3,456 strands in it. When we built the middle mile access as a result of the last recession that we had in 2008, federal government spent about $780 million. Every state built a core network going around their state, and the core contained 48 strands. So you can see how far we've progressed, and I can explain why it would be useful to have more and more strands if possible. So I'll just get let's start over here. Feel free to follow the fiber, you're not going to hurt it or anything. This is an example of different types of conduit here. If you're familiar with any kind of road work, if you've seen it, the conduit is plastic pipe that's usually 2 or 4 inches that goes in the ground. And anything can be put in it, from water to fiber. And these are some different types of conduit. This would go into a slot trench. You've probably seen saws going around the street, cutting up the pavement if they're doing resurfacing, or if they have to dig a hole to replace a sewer pipe or something. And this is the width of a saw blade, a little more than 1/4 of an inch by about 2 inches. The saw blade goes down 6 to 12 inches. You put this in, slide the fiber in, and you're done. So here are some other examples. This is a fiber that would go in somebody's home. 2 strands, one for transmission and receipt. So they're pretty small. This is a small piece of conduit that would go into somebody's home from the core network. So if you picture this, only 2 inches or 4 inches diameter, that's what would go in the core, and this would go directly into somebody's house. So when the internet companies, the communications companies, they can either put fiber on telephone poles, utility poles, or they can put it in the ground. Putting it on poles is cheaper, putting it in the ground makes it last longer. So after a 20 or 30 or 40 year period, they pretty much even out in terms of their cost, because you may have to replace fiber that is exposed to the weather, especially in Minnesota. Whereas in the ground, if it's buried, then you don't have to do that. There's been fiber that's been put in the ground in the 60s and 70s that's still quite actively useful. There are some advances that have been made, but essentially the fiber is so cheap and so effective that if for some reason you needed more, you just put another slug of fiber in, just slide it right into the conduit, and you're good for another 20 or 30 years. If there's one thing I can say, whether it's the county who's doing this or some entity the county creates to manage some assets, or any internet service providers, if you need to have fiber in the core so that internet service providers can make connections to their houses and businesses, then if you're digging up the road for any reason, to resurface it, to replace sewer pipes or water pipes, or any other type of underground infrastructure, be sure that you put conduit into the road. Because if you do it in conjunction with another project like resurfacing, the cost is about $2 to $7 per linear foot for conduit. And if you do that as kind of a standalone project only to put fiber in the ground, you're talking $25 to $35, because the expense isn't digging the hole. The expense isn't in the conduit, it isn't in the fiber. That fiber that I'm passing around is less than $1 a linear foot. 288 strands, about $1.50. So that's pennies on the dollar in terms of the overall expense of putting any infrastructure in the ground or on poles. We will also recommend, probably after we do a lot of study, where there might be areas that the county or some entity the county works with could put towers, additional towers up, so that people in the rural areas can get better access than perhaps DSL, which might give them 2 or 3 megabits on a good day, some even slower than that. So the federal minimum transfer speed now is 25 megabits download, 3 megabits upload, which we think is woefully inadequate. And in fact, the new grants that are coming out from the federal government, and we think there's going to be like $65 billion that will probably be released sometime in the future, assuming we have a governor past October 1st. They require 100 megabits down and 20 megabits up. And the only medium really that can propagate that sort of bandwidth is fiber. But we recognize that in order to get people out in the country who couldn't get fiber right away because of the expense and the distance, that in the short term, it might be more feasible for them to have fixed wireless, which means that there's a tower, there's a radio on top of the tower with the antenna, and that transmitter emits a radio signal in a radius probably 5 to 10 miles, so that any residences in that area, if they have a small antenna, they can collect that signal and they can get pretty good broadband. Some locations where you might be in a valley where you can't quite see the tower, then you can have what's called a community pole, where you put up a 70 or 80 foot wooden utility pole and you put an antenna on top of that, and then you put fiber down to the homes within that location. So there are all sorts of ways of getting better broadband to people, and it's not rocket science. It's utility work that counties and cities, utility departments do all the time. They build roads, they build schools, airports. So this is just an infrastructure project that we're talking about. So I don't think there are any surprises in this survey so far. You probably got a chance to look at this. 44% indicate the availability of broadband internet is affecting where they choose to live. Used to be schools, and now it's broadband. I can't tell you how many times I've been at a meeting, either like this or smaller meetings, where people have been almost in tears at the table because they came in and bought property. They were told they could get broadband. They bought the house. They called up the cable company and they said, no, no way. Some people have offered $5,000, $10,000 to make a connection and they still say no. So this happens, and that's why we get statistics like that. So if people can't get broadband where they live, there is a strong temptation to move out. And as much as they might love the community, nowadays, since so many people are working from home or they're having their files stored in the cloud because their kids need to get pretty good internet in order just to do their basic schoolwork, that strongly influences where people live, and we want people to live in Wright County. In the course of doing the survey, one of the things we ask is your address. We don't ask your name. We ask your address because when you're answering the questions and submit them, we ask questions like, what is the speed of your internet connection? Who provides your service? Are you satisfied with the connection? And since we have the address, we can then plot those responses on a map, and we know where the gaps are in the services. So for instance, if you look at this over in the eastern portion of the county, green would indicate that most people seem to have pretty decent internet connectivity. So the green in this case is 100 megabits download. So that would be pretty good. In urban areas, it's not uncommon at all for a standard connection to be like 300 megabits. And that's because it's much more efficient for the cable companies and the other telecom companies to be able to put high capacity communications infrastructure in the streets and on the poles because they have so many people nearby who can take advantage of it. When you get under the rural areas, as you can see from these red dots, it's much harder. So in that case, you're relying primarily on wireless. Now, we happen to think in my company that eventually everybody will have fiber, just like everybody now has electricity. But it's going to take time. So as long as people realize that this is kind of an organic process that's going to take 5, 10, 15 years, and in fact, it's going to be continuing, that eventually you probably will get fiber everywhere. It may be hard for people to believe in this room, but back in the 20s, electricity was considered a luxury. And it wasn't until we got the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA, where essentially they defined electricity as a utility, that it became more available and eventually to everybody in the country. But initially, when I'm talking like the next 5 years, to get better broadband out into the rural areas, it's probably going to require fixed wireless, and that means there may be some additional towers that may be required. The wireless internet service providers generally are much scrappier, smaller companies. They don't have the resources to build a tower, but they would love to have the tower so that they could put their radio up there and get more customers that they're not servicing now. So we're going to look very closely at that opportunity. Eventually, all the towers are going to be connected to fiber, because as the radios get better and they can handle more data, that data has to be somehow collected and brought back to the central office for distribution over the internet, and the best way to do that is by fiber. So this is a mixed technology, includes both wireline with fiber, fixed wireless with radios, and eventually they're going to meet. And I would think that in most cases, in the future, people are probably going to have both. You can use the wireless as a backup. You can use, in case somebody comes along and with a backhoe and rips out a section of fiber. Might take a few hours or a day or so to get that replaced, even though you might design a redundant network. So in that case, you rely on the wireless system. Or you may even rely on Elon Musk's Starlink satellites. That's another option. So the point is that you want to have a comprehensive plan which includes all these eventualities. So this is a map, and we have a whole bunch of layers on maps stacked up. We have income distribution, because we need to know where poor, medium income people live, because that's where the grants are directed. So if we have an unserved area that has poor broadband in a poor area, we have a better chance of getting more money to put either fiber or wireless in those areas. So this is another variation on the map. This is asking them what their level of service is, and this is their satisfactory level. So in addition to asking them what their bandwidth speed is, and as you might imagine, a lot of people really don't know, this asks you whether you're satisfied, which is green, that's very satisfied, or whether you're very dissatisfied, which is red. So if you're colorblind, it might be a little hard, but there are two levels of green. There's a deep green, which means I'm very satisfied, a lighter green, which means I'm satisfied. There's neutral, and there's not satisfied, which is orange. I guess that's yellow. And the red is very dissatisfied. So again, you can see the patterns here. Built up areas, they tend to have more green dots because they're concentrated, so therefore the cable companies, they're sort of the prime customers there, because they can put more resources there because it's a more compact area. And as you get out into the more rural areas, you see more red dots. So what we're trying to do is identify areas that are predominantly red, and if they are concentrated, then they may be a subject for a fiber pilot, possibly, which we will cost out. We will tell the county how much it would cost to put fiber out here and how much the county might be able to make back from that installation by leasing out resources to the internet service providers. So for instance, if you take that 144 strand or 288 strand fiber and the county runs it out to a certain area, and then the providers come in and say, well, I'd like to lease 15 strands or 24 strands or whatever it might be, and they pay so much per month for that, and that allows the county or whatever entity the county might create as some kind of nonprofit or public-private partnership, that allows them to recoup the costs. So over a period of 10 years, they should actually be making money on the network, at least enough to cover any depreciation that might recur on the network and build it out further and further. And in fact, what we do is provide a detailed pro forma financial plan that tells the county to start this network, here's how much money you have. In the first year, here's how many customers we expect that you would get. Here's how much they would pay a month. And then over a 10-year period, presumably the revenues would increase. Typically, that's what happens, so that the network eventually winds up paying for itself. Now, that network doesn't mean that the county is actually doing the connection to the homes. It means that it's putting perhaps some core fiber in the streets or on the poles, and the service providers are then leasing that. They're either leasing space on the towers for the radios, or they're leasing some strands on the fiber that goes down the street. So we would hope that in 5 or 10 years, those red dots become green. Because I think the way we're going now, they're going to be red forever. Now, there's a whole series of questions here, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to summarize a few. Most of the important things are actually summarized in the front there, but if you dig down, here's some of the more detailed responses. We already talked about, I need better internet service, 86%. Well, that's no surprise. Typically, it goes from 85 to 95%. It was 92% over in St. Croix County yesterday. It's 86% in Wright County here today. We did a study in St. Croix. Only 28% are satisfied with all their services. I presume the services would mean telephone, their broadband connection, their TV, etc. All of those things now, as you probably know, are becoming software that can be presented in broadband. In other words, you don't necessarily now have to buy a triple play, which has telephone, TV, and broadband. You simply buy the broadband, and then you pick all the streaming that you want, and you use a voice over IP application to do all your voice calls, or you use a cell phone. So times have changed, and it's time for the providers to change with it. People are not dumb, though, because every quarter I see publications, I see figures on the number of subscribers for linear television, call it appointment TV, that the cable providers have lost. And typically it's around $300,000 or $400,000 per Comcast or per Charter every quarter. People are now going to streaming. People are using broadband only. They're not paying the extra $100, $150, which increases every, who knows, 10, 12, 15% every year. This is a question on how many total internet users are in the household. So you can see here that the largest percentage, largest concentration is 2 per household. One of the items here is how much you pay. We asked them how much you pay for the internet, and here's the distribution of that. There's 20% that pay over $200 a month for all their communications needs. So I think that's pretty high, but that's what most people are forced to pay right now. We have a breakdown on the types of communication services that they have. Cable modem from Charter or for some other cable provider is by far the largest, 47%. We call that little broadband because even if you get up to 100 or more megabits down, typically the upload speed where you're trying to send files back to your office or one of your kids is trying to send a video or some assignment back to school, that's very, very low, typically somewhere between 3 and 15 megabits. With fiber, it's typically synchronous, which means the same speed down is the same speed up. So if you have a 100 megabit connection or a gigabit connection, you also get the same speed back. That's particularly important for businesses. So we've already talked a little bit about the distribution of the speeds. It's pretty low in general, as you probably suspect. The upload speeds here, less than a megabit, 12%. Between 1 and 3 megabits, an additional 17%. That's hardly what I would consider to be broadband, but that's what a lot of people in Wright County have to live with. And that might have been good 5 years ago, but it's not now.
One of the issues with the asymmetric speeds on iOS, they sense that Wi-Fi network
These are the applications that people have indicated that they're using, so you get a pretty good idea there. We used to have email on here, but I think we don't have it on there now because everybody uses it for email. But 85% use it for streaming, et cetera. Online backup, 66%. So you get the idea here. This is one that certainly has changed over the past few years. Online gaming is 39%. So if you have any high school or college kids at home, then you're probably spending 80% of your internet on gaming and may not even realize it. So here's that statistic that we talked about earlier, that 44% of the people said that if they couldn't get good internet, they would leave. So that's a telling statistic. Anyway, the most important part of the survey, I think, because none of those I don't think are really surprising, at least not to me. There is a comment section. We also did the business survey too, but I'm not going to go through that now. We had about 100 respondents to the businesses. But we asked them pretty much the same questions as the residents. But down here in about page, I don't know, 30-something, we start with the responses that came in. We have a narrative portion on the survey. So those of you who have taken the survey, you may have your responses here. I highlighted a few of them in yellow, just going through them. But out of a 138-page report, almost 100 pages are these narratives that people wrote about their particular instance. So I'll just pick out a couple of them and read them for you. I highlighted them for several reasons. One is because of the way they express themselves. And the other is because I think they're particularly interesting for what they say here. This one is they have CenturyLink. It's terrible and works so infrequently that we also have to use standalone hotspots for when CenturyLink is down. We have, I'm using, try to spread out all the insults on the service provider so I don't focus on one particular one. We have TDS for landline internet and Verizon LTE home to split things up because neither one can keep up with our usage by itself. The only internet available in my area is Frontier Communications, and it is very poor service. This has been a problem in our area for quite some time, unless we would hook up to a satellite company for service. I also use a hotspot when Frontier is not working. Would love to see fiber optic come to our areas. I don't know if you're familiar with the Frontier story, but Frontier inherited, they bought a lot of Verizon's lines when Verizon decided to get out of the landline business and focus on wireless because they could buy spectrum, which meant that other people couldn't offer the wireless service, whereas anybody can put fiber in. So as a result of that, Frontier inherited this technology that's in some cases almost 100 years old. And the business plan was to try to use it as long as they could, no matter if it worked or not. And as a result, Frontier went bankrupt, and they just emerged from bankruptcy. And now they've discovered the religion, and they're going to put fiber everywhere. So we'll see what happens. That would be great if they did, but we don't know if it's a talking point yet or if they really intend to do that. But anyway, there are a lot of horror stories. We think competition is a wonderful thing, and unfortunately, the telecom space has been a monopoly, and a lot of the operators are still operating with that mentality. So I think it's great that like Meeker Co-op is getting involved as well as other co-ops. There's plenty of room. There's plenty of business. I'm going to show you exactly what that is in just a minute in Wright County. You can read this yourself. I don't need to read it to you, but you get the idea. We can go through these. As I said, there's 100 pages of these. Some of them are very thoughtful, and some of them are unprintable, although we did print some of them here. But if you look through the report, I think you'd get quite an education. And if you have insomnia, you just stay up some night and you're looking for something to do, this would be great to read.
Yeah, right.
All right, so I'm going to switch from that and just quickly cover this other part of the report that we do, which is we call it the Internet Service Provider Report. So this is a section of the study that we submit, and we go through all the offerings that every provider has in Wright County. Here we've broken it down by zip code, and it tells you the percentage of subscribers in each of those zip codes, how much cable, DSL, wireless, and fiber is provided. So, for instance, in Albertville, supposedly everybody has cable, or at least that's what the cable company says, they provide it to everybody. 98% have DSL, 100% have wireless, and 51% have fiber. That's a pretty healthy mix. I mean, if we could get all of the zip codes up to that level, that probably wouldn't be bad, because it implies to me that we've got a lot of providers in that area. And Elizabeth and I talked to, I think, 12 or 13 providers in Wright County. So I think that's a record, at least from my experience, in how many providers there are in the county supposedly offering broadband services of various types. So we went through every zip code and we came out with that chart. And we also figured out what the average cost of the cable fees are. Now, this is the basic package, which is $156, but there's more. If you add on top of that all of the fees, here's how they're broken out. So there's quite a bit of excess baggage that's on there, and some of the fees are obvious. They say government taxes, but others, you really don't know what they are. And if you try to find out what they are, there's usually a lot of double talk involved. So the average bill nationally is $217.42. Now, combining all of that information, we come up with one chart here, which are the existing telecom expenditures for Wright County, and then we project how much Wright County residents and businesses are going to pay for their communications over the next 30 years. So, for instance, there are 48,000 households in Wright County, 3,400 businesses. So we've got four categories here, four buckets of communications. We have cell phone. People are using their cell phone for internet because that's the only option they have in most cases because it's expensive. Little broadband, which is DSL, cable modem through Charter or another cable company, and households with no internet. So they use a cell phone, no internet, and they might use cable satellite TV, but they're not using broadband as we define it. So these are the costs on a monthly basis, average annual cost. So if you total all that up, what you come up with is $3.6 billion that's going to be spent by Wright County residents over the course of the next 30 years. So one of the first things I'm typically asked when I come into a community is, well, how much is it going to cost to do this? Well, it's going to cost money. And where does that money come from? Well, you could start out with some government grants, and we think there's going to be a lot of that available. There's already some available through the American Rescue Plan, and we had CARES, some of which was devoted to broadband. We actually built up some networks with CARES money. But just in the normal course of business, $3.6 billion, if the county could get a small, very, very small 2-3% slice of that, you could have the best broadband network in the country. So we're going to project all of that out. We're going to tell the county, or suggest to the county, what the cost would be to fill the gaps in broadband, where the county could effectively spend some money by actually putting in and owning certain assets, and then how they could help the internet service providers extend their service out to the residences. And I'm encouraged by the fact that we did talk to so many providers, because in the past, they wouldn't talk to us at all. But they're doing it more and more now, and in fact, I was telling Elizabeth, I can foresee the day when a county is going to put in some core fiber and Charter or Comcast or another provider comes along and says, I want at least 20 strands of fiber so that I can offer my services, because I'm really in the media business. I'm Comcast, I own NBC, I own Universal Studios, I'm AT&T, I bought Time Warner's media assets, and I want to sell those to my subscribers. I want them to sit in their living room, open their mouth, and I'm going to put as much media down there as I can. I don't care about upload speeds, I'm only interested in the download speeds. So that's really the business that they're in. They don't want to spend their money building networks. The Verizon stockholders were mad at Verizon when they built FiOS because it was a big capital project, took money away from their dividends, so Verizon doesn't do FiOS anymore. So this could be a win-win in the sense that if the county knows what the problem is and knows specifically where to make some investment, and the service providers are hungry to get that because they don't have to expend it on building the core, they just need to make some connections to their subscribers to get them more speed so they can buy more services. That's a win-win. So that's the plan in general. Questions? I'll be back here probably in another 2-3 weeks or so with the final report. We're going to do the fiber pilot. We're going to let the county know what the costs are. In my experience, when the officials see what the actual costs of building network are, they're surprised it's so low. Because the internet providers would have you believe this is brain surgery or rocket science or something like that. And the counties have no business being in that, whereas the counties know how to build roads or schools or in some cases airports. So this shouldn't be difficult for them to do at all if they chose to do that. That's an option. Yes, sir.
This full report available online somewhere?
It is not yet. It's still in draft form. I don't know what you guys think about pulling the comments out and just posting the draft online. Would you be comfortable with that?
Yeah, the comments are very numerous, and there's some of the comments that,
We would get in trouble if we posted.
yeah.
But we can work on getting it posted on the website tomorrow morning.
But it'd be the basic information.
If there are any adult bookstores, maybe you could have it for sale there.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And, before you guys get to all the questions, he will also take answers too. So if you have answers, you can give them to him.
Yes, sir.
So, trying to understand, so the current fiber that's laid down, it could either be owned by Comcast or somebody like that, or it could be owned by county. I'm trying to figure out how, in our scenario, where you got Comcast a half mile to the north and you have CenturyLink a half mile to the south, you connect the two, how do you connect the two or run that line between the two? Who owns it? And who, the same thing, we had Midco come screaming through from Annandale, went right by everybody and went over to Greenfield. Like, how does that happen?
Well, that's a good question. I'm asked that almost everywhere. I can't tell you how many times people will say, there's fiber buried right there or on that pole, and I don't have access to it. And that's true. There's fiber all over this country. And it's going from point A to point B, and most of those points are big cities. Or they're specific installations like large businesses or factories or some other use. They're not designed for residential connections to the internet. So there's no way that you're going to get them to change their business plan in terms of the long distance fiber. In the case of the cable companies where they each have their territory, you've heard of the mafia? They split up territories.
Yeah.
Well, they probably learned from the cable companies because they all have their territories and they won't go a block beyond what that is, no matter how much money you want to give them. And not only that, but within their territory, AT&T, and this is published information, they charge different rates depending on what street you live on. So they have a business plan which is really divorced from the technology. They don't care. They define a territory and they say, this is going to be profitable for us. This is it. Lock it up. Do the installation. Let's collect the fees, and that's it. And then they go somewhere else. If in fact they do it at all. In rural areas, they don't do it at all. So getting them to talk to each other, the only way to do it that I can see is for the county to create some entity which is studying this, which they've essentially done, at least the first part, by hiring us, so that the cable companies know that something's going to happen, that something's going to upset their apple cart, or at least it has the potential to do it. So they better find out what's going on and they better get on board. Because if they don't provide service to people who need it in a reasonable way, reasonable expense, then the county's going to do it for them. What I'm hoping is that we have Meeker Co-op and a whole bunch of other people come in, and then, as I said earlier, Wright County is in a good position. So I think they can be energized. If they realize that the county is coming up with a comprehensive plan and it's designed to help them provide better service, they will be very forthcoming, I think, with the county, as Meeker has already done. Meeker gave us their plans about what they intend to do. So they're looking for the county to understand what they're doing so that the county can decide that if they put a tower in a certain place or they put some cable in, don't even have to put the fiber in, just put the conduit in and let the providers come and blow in the fiber and use that. You can put, in a 4-inch conduit, even in a 2-inch conduit, you could put thousands of strands in it if you chose to do it. So that's not a problem. The problem is getting them to commit to expanding beyond what their original plan might have been. And if there's competition, then the prices will come down and the services will get better, just like it happens with every other business.
So just a follow-up on that, so if Meeker Co-op wants to come in, which would be phenomenal, but how do they get from Meeker County to eastern Wright County?
I know somebody who might be able to tell us
By
that.
crossing competitive lines or using competitive hardware? How does that work?
I'll aspect, but first of all, I need to clarify, Jack got my name right, but I am not the president of the company. Services and Business Development Manager board.
I just promoted you.
Thank you. And I'm also then good, because I've also got our 2 Energize and Connect managers, Holly and Mary, here, so that we can go back tomorrow and say I've been promoted. That'll be part of the lot.
We'll let Tim know.
Yeah, we'll let the CEO know. So thanks. But, we're on the western, we have service in the western part of, service in the western part of Wright County. And the edges of a lot of other counties, can't and those. We brought up against, we've got a lady here from Harvard, I saw your name tag on there. So. Anyway, so the competition has stepped up to the plate when we got put our stuff in the ground and in our fixed wireless in Meeker County out there. So it's just helped the whole area and which is good for all the residents. But how do we get over to you? Well, that's the challenge. It might be a long way, and may not be feasible to do that. But it's kind of connecting the dots. And Jack, help me if I'm wrong here. But it's about the number of subscribers per mile and connecting the dots and how far is that going to be feasible for us to do that? We just can't go running lines like you had described, or Jack said. We're just going to go like whatever company, Bidco, whipping through and not going to connect anybody between. That's not what we do. But I mean, there's opportunity. It's a plan, and it's all about how many people you're going to have. And that's why we went with a hybrid system, fiber in the ground and fixed wireless, because we knew that we couldn't get fiber or didn't want to do fiber to everybody with our topography out there. So we got a lot of people on fixed wireless, and some of them getting 100 down by our fixed wireless service. It's working just great for them, and they're working from home and learning from home and doing everything like that.
Typically, what are your speeds?
Well, like I said, we offer 25, 50, 75, and 100, and we've got a lot of people. I think Mary and Holly, 50 and 75 and 100, that's where people are taking. So I got some stories that's kind of funny. When I was out there years ago selling, is people were paying 70, 80 bucks for 10 megabits download. That's what they're paying for, and they're getting 3 or 4 actual. And then we would say, well, our plan, second to the highest plan is 75 to 100 bucks. They could have saved money, but they're just used to, well, we're going to pay 70 bucks and we're going to get 10 times the service we have. We're going to do it right away.
Yeah, I looked into the vibrant internet, and I'm in the service area, but there's too many hills and trees to the tower. It's on Big Swan, I believe.
Oh, sure.
And so what are the chances of my ever getting something better than CenturyLink?
So we've got you on the list. Let's get with Holly and Mary just so that we know to come back. But yeah, we are working on that as well to improve our fixed wireless service out there.
I hate to cut you off, but there are other IT providers, And I don't
I
want
was
to
just going to ask
cause
if
a
there were any
problem.
other providers in the
Oh,
room.
yeah, we have quite a few in here.
But-
Glad to answer questions.
Yeah, no, and I'd rather have Jack
Yep,
ask the questions, and
Okay.
I don't want to get us into trouble.
yep.
We love all of our internet service providers. I'm just throwing that out there. How's that?
That's going too far.
We have equal preference for everybody.
Yes, sir.
I'm fortunate in that I do have high-speed internet. I have cable.
Yep.
However, there is no choice if I want high-speed internet.
That's right.
And my concern is this plan that you are going to be working on, is this going to provide me an alternative?
That's entirely up to the county to decide. Yeah, well,
I wouldn't say that.
I
Okay.
watched CenturyLink actually install their fiber optic cable not far from my house,
yeah.
but I can't get CenturyLink.
What happens when you talk to them?
They say they don't provide service.
You ask them what their fiber was for?
I didn't ask them.
I just want to add to that a little bit. So what the county's looking at doing is basically adding middle mile fiber, right? So everyone's got long haul transit. Providers are in all various areas. Some have rules of what might. But they create this middle mile environment. Basically what it does is there's a big cost reduction for providers, like from Meeker or corner, right? You can't get all the way across right now. Unless that middle mile exists, because the last mile you can have across the neighborhood. Looking at investing in either the infrastructure built completely or a conduit system where there's a big cost reduction for providers to get areas that they're not going to today because there's no ROI that supports it because they have to build big trunk lines all the way across the county. But once that middle mile is established, all these providers have equal access to this area. Make broadband that much better. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. Although I tried. Yes, sir.
Question for me, Kelly again. Is Wright Hannaford involved? Talk with them, and is that leak that goes across Wright County towards the east?
Would Wright Hennepin Cooperative be involved? I don't know. I mean, they know what we're doing, and I don't know what their appetite for that.
I've spoken to Wright Hennepin, and they've said they're not planning on getting into internet to be an internet service provider at this time. So
One of the things that we're also hoping to accomplish by what Jack is doing, or Design 9 is doing, is to put us in a better place to help the ISPs apply for some of the funding from the state and the federal government. So that hopefully with that additional funding, they'll be able to get to places where they can't get to now, or they can't afford to get to because of lack of residents or something.
The cities, the counties, the state, they control all the roads. So anybody who wants to, and the utility companies control the poles. So anyone who wants to make improvements certainly has to go through some government entity to do it. So the government by definition is involved in that sense. Yes, sir.
Would it be possible that somebody like him might want to contact the city of Buffalo and take over that Buffalo Wireless Internet group that they used to have? And we had it out in Chatham Township and it worked pretty good. And then they went out of business and it died.
Well, you might not want to say it now, but maybe you could talk to him after the meeting. I don't know. I don't, but yeah, if there are assets there, somebody could probably use them. Yes, sir.
I kind of have two questions, but we were of the 44% that we from Otsego moved into Buffalo.
Yep.
And I called and I checked with CenturyLink and made sure that where we were building that we would get internet there. And we, I also talked with Buffalo because they have a fixed wireless off of the water tower over at Pulaski. That it's too far away from your house or whatever. But anyway, CenturyLink was good, so we moved in and they hooked it up and getting like 15 down and 1 up, and I have about 50 devices that are hooked in, and it just crumbled underneath. So we're like, what's going on? And they said, well, you're at the end of a dead-end street, so you're not double bonded, and $5 grand, maybe make it work. But anyway, we can't guarantee. So, so we have been using mobile as home internet, and it works okay. But last lightning storm or whatever knocked out a tower, and so from August 19th to present, we got internet. And so, anyway, my question is, this is very specific. How can I best advocate that, or how would you suggest we buy and advocate to this process that we all forward?
Well, this is certainly a great first step right here tonight. Just by showing up at this meeting, I think certainly the commissioners are elected officials. They listen to the people, and they recognize that there's a problem in the county. So you're pointing out the specifics in your particular case, and I think that's very powerful.
And don't just stop with us, also.
Talk to your congressman or woman. Right now, the policies about how grants go out are being set by members of Congress who do not know how to program their VCR. And I say that because many of the regulations that they apply don't make a lot of sense to IT professionals, but yet IT professionals aren't the ones setting the policy. Talk to your congress people.
The problem is I do know how to program their VCRs, but nobody's used them in the past 20 years.
Well, my Betamax still works.
Can you fix my 8-track tape player?
I got your back.
All right.
Steely Dan on repeat.
Well, let me just give you a little bit of coming attractions, I guess. We have the draft survey, as Elizabeth said, and at some point this will be available for anyone to look at. You are going to clean it up, I think, a little bit, but.
We'll just remove the comments at the end, and we'll put the first part with the maps and the summary of data out there.
Okay, go ahead.
Were there?
Yes, you've had your hand up.
Questions. Yours is interesting.
Why don't you come up here so everybody can hear it?
Okay, I'll be loud. Your question, if you were in an electric company, your electric provider would have, your co-op would have taken care of it. Internet provider doesn't, so I would talk. So that's just a side comment. But this is my internet right here. This is what I have. My question is, what do you do so the wireless, I believe, called?
Yeah.
Is that what your thought is for the rural areas where like my neighbor is a half mile from me or a mile? Where, because I've heard talk about neighborhoods don't have a neighborhood, so that the thought for that, or
Yes.
like 10 years down the, you said 5 to 15 years? Like 15 years down?
No, I think again, it depends on what the county does. The county may establish an entity. They may not. They may a private company come. But it's feasible that towers could be constructed within 5 years, maybe sooner, depending on what the mission is. And if that happens, then people in the rural areas could get pretty good internet quicker than people in the municipal areas. Longer put fiber in because you have to cut the roads or hang poles, you have to get permission. So it's conceivable that the towers could be in operation long before.
Will that be communicated to townships?
Yes, there'll be a time frame. How
What
long it
I've
takes to
heard
fit up a tower. Typically about 18 months is what it takes. So if the commission or an entity would decide to do it tonight, it might be 18 months.
But I've heard from townships being involved, like contributing. Well, how does it help my Middleville township? And I don't have any neighbors. How can I help my township?
Well, you're part of the county and you're part of the state.
Yep.
And funding plans are pretty convoluted. They're all different.
Yep.
But it's my understanding that certainly with the American Rescue Plan, it was primarily state, some of it state, some of it counties. Same thing is going to be true, I think, with $5 million is projected for projects to go. So I'm not sure exactly how a particular township is.
Just so we're talking about the same thing, what was your name, ma'am? Is
For full disclosure, Jen works in our IT department. She's actually the brains behind
That guy.
when you say fixed wireless, it also doesn't mean cell phone. There's like microwave towers. There's alternate methods of fixed and wireless that don't necessarily fall in the 5G, 3G, 4G, LTE, T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon. So fixed wireless is an option, but when you hear that, don't immediately think cell phone providers. There are other options. Ms. Rassett, I believe it was.
Jen, don't worry, we'll make sure you're the last one.
Then I have, you mentioned income, so that would help with grants.
That's
So
right.
When you're talking, so core area and core broadband, the two together, will population affect, like, will it be concentrated in a neighborhood?
No, I don't think so.
No? But it will be population.
There are programs that are designed primarily for unserved areas, and that almost by definition means you don't have to just spread out. So there's money specifically for those areas. There's not that much money for the urban areas because presumably they already have a lot of providers who are offering pretty good service. That doesn't mean that there aren't people in the cities who don't have broadband because it can be. So we know there are now grants or funding that's available to help people pay for their internet, $50 a month. I think several million people have already taken advantage. And that's whether you're in the urban areas or in the rural areas. Depends on what your income is. Yes.
So I want to mention that we built 5 years ago in Buffalo. And when we built, we just assumed that there was good internet service. And it's just been an absolute nightmare. We would not have built our home if I'd done the diligence. We got a cabin in like the middle of Wisconsin that's it's got 20x speeds of what we're seeing in Buffalo. So I was shocked when that happened. And I think more and more you will see the impact of the economic. Don't have good broadband. It's just the lifeblood of what we do. And I have researched this in and out and have looked at all the options available. Fixed wireless to DSL 1, DSL, to cellular 5G. I've got T-Mobile home. I've tried everything. I did sign up for Starlink beta. It's supposed to be RFU, but here I know people are using it. This is really good. And so I think a Starlink is going to be expensive. It's about $100 a month. But I think the latency is very low. Lights are low. I've worked in this business, by the way, for network services. Latency really is a challenge for a lot of people.
Especially if you're doing video, interactive video.
Yeah, anything interactive, voice, video, all that. So that is a non-issue with Starlink, unlike news-based services where the satellites are much higher orbit. So all I'm saying is you get really, like you, who, when I listen to your story, I think your chances of getting high speed. I don't mean to step on your toes, but it's a long time. Your option, your best option is going to be
Starlink would be good if you don't.
If you're interested in Starlink, talk to me about it offline. I have a buddy that did it, and I worked Milsatcom for a number of years. Here's the God's honest truth. What we're trying to do is bridge the gap. What section of Wright County grew the biggest? Otsego. Look at his map. Who has the best internet? Otsego. It is in everybody's best interest to put money into Otsego if you're an ISP because you get a return on your investment. Taking fiber out to Miss Rassett's house does me nothing if I'm an ISP. There's no good. So what we're doing, we've commissioned a report to look at these situations to say, where can we put the most bang for our buck by bridging that middle mile so that we could help out? And we're looking at a number of different alternatives, but we're trying to make sure that we can be that intermediary to try to help make it worth Spectrum or Midco or any EIEIO, ISP out there, in order to ensure that you can get served. And there are multiple options we're looking at. It doesn't have to be fiber to the home. It could be microwave. It could be wireless. I can tell you all about Starlink. more than you're ever going to want to know. But that's ultimately why we commissioned the study and what the study is telling us. It tells us the areas that need help. But the louder you tell us you need help, the more it helps us to go to the government and other bodies to get extra money. Part of the reason we need you involved is I need you screaming. I need you screaming to them. I need you screaming to your congresspeople. I need you screaming wherever you can.
How much louder do we get to scream? I mean, I think everybody in here is pretty frustrated and
I can
upset.
completely understand and sympathize. I hate to say this, it's a marathon, not a sprint. If you want to, I'll give you my personal information. We can stay in touch. Anytime I need some help, you can reach out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been involved over a year in this stuff. It's absolutely ridiculous that, like, the gentleman over there said that you got cabins in northern Wisconsin. I got customers in the middle of nowhere. I got an uncle who lives in Redwood County. He owns all the farmland within 1.5 miles of him, and he's got fiber. Where's Wright County been?
I surfaced the submarine in the Arctic and I had broadband. It happens.
I mean, no, and I'm, you know.
It could be worse. In Sherburne County, where he lives, they still use the 2 cans and the string between them. So
I got a new
it
can
could be
this year,
worse.
so.
I just wanted to, maybe if I could, just talk a little bit about the American Rescue Plan funding, just to make sure everyone's hearing the same message. So the county has received a good amount of money through the American Rescue Plan back in March, and we've allocated 10 million to start looking at broadband. I can say that number, right? 10 million?
You just did.
Okay. Your townships and cities have also been allocated American Rescue Plan funding, and an allowable use of that is also broadband. So that is one way we can partner with cities and townships to try to stretch that money a little further. But so that's money we have control over what we want to do with it. We do have to make sure we're meeting unserved and underserved homes. That's kind of the big criteria there. Otherwise, for funding, we're going to have to be competitive, which is what our study is going to help us be able to do. We're going to have to go over, for those state grants that people are talking about. More than likely, that federal money is going to come through in a grant form. We're still going to have to compete with it. I don't think we're going to get any allocations. And then there's another federal program. Jack, I don't know if you want to talk about RDOF at all and explain to people that that's another thing where supposedly better service is coming in the next 6 years to certain portions of the county.
Well, I don't want to build any false hopes.
Right, but it's out there and it limits
RDOF
some of what we can do as a
Rural
county.
Digital Opportunities funding program, which was set up by the FCC to try to underwrite some of the cost that providers have in servicing or installing internet in unserved areas. The reason, of course, that the providers don't do that on their own is because it's expensive. They don't make enough profit on it. So they held what's called a reverse auction, where they had all these addresses that they defined as underserved or unserved. And all of the providers looked at them and they said, well, I'll give you $1,000 or something to connect that location. And if the provider said $1,000 and the government put in, say, $200 or $300, some fee, roughly about a third or so of what the total cost would be. So, for instance, I can give you an example. In Texas, we're doing a 14-county study, and Charter is one of the providers there, Spectrum. And Charter won the right to provide broadband to 53,000 addresses within that 14-county area. So, of course, Charter is very interested in what we're doing there and what the counties are doing, because they recognize the value in having the counties spend money putting in the core of the network. We actually designed a middle mile ring around the 14 counties so that companies like Charter can then use that as a base to connect all of their addresses that they have to connect. So they have 6 years to do that. It's a 10-year program, but once they get the award, they're supposed to do it, actually connect that address within 6 years. In Minnesota and Wisconsin, it's primarily LTD that won most of the contracts for the RDOF in that area. And I don't know, is anybody here from LTD? They didn't have a very good reputation going in, and apparently they're reneging on a lot of the bids that they made. And the federal government has allowed them all of the providers a certain amount of time to say, I don't really want to do that. So the federal government takes it back, and presumably they'll have another auction at a later time to try to connect those areas. But so it remains to be seen just how much this program is going to improve the broadband. And there's a lot of money involved too. It comes out in various phases, but I think the last one was like $7 billion. So there's a lot of money involved. So we're going to watch LTD and the other RDOF award winners to see what their plans are and how well they're doing. But we have to follow it over a 6-year process. So that'll be beyond my time, but we'll see what happens in the next couple of years.
Does the county have a timeline that they're looking at? I mean, say, really like to get this accomplished in this amount of time?
Well, one of the things we are going to do starting next spring is that any new road construction or rebuilds of roads, we will be probably laying, or we at least will put it in as an option for in the bids to at least lay pipe in the ground. Not, I don't think cable or fiber, but at least the pipe so that it's cheaper for them to run it after the fact. And then, you know, we'll see who will provide the best service before we say, yes, you can use that piping.
We are time boxed on the use of the American Rescue Plan funds. We have to have that all spent by the end of 2026.
Well, I'd say we're in much better shape now than we were a couple of years ago. And I think people realize the importance of doing that. So I think that's encouraging. Yes, sir.
I have a quick question. Is there enough, head-end, the 18 units, that provide the head-end service for these areas? Or do they have to actually connect fiber to get to locations to provide enough bandwidth?
Well, the head end is kind of a term used for cable television, and we really don't have.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So,
Well, there has to be some central location. There has to be a room, a closet, or possibly a building that has a switch in it that essentially controls the fiber, the signal going on the fiber.
right, but you got to have enough bandwidth to get to that point.
Yeah. That's not hard.
Okay, that's a simple one.
Yeah, and I'm frequently asked, well, when I make a presentation, somebody will say, well, we're waiting for Starlink, or we're going to wait for 5G, we're not going to make any investment. Well, all of those are based ultimately on some sort of fiber connectivity, because fiber has so much more capacity. It's now, I think, 314 terabits is the current record. A gigabit is 1,000 megabits, and a terabit is 1,000 gigabits. And they did that using standard fiber that you would put in Buffalo. And they used what's called wavelengths, where you divide up the light. It's now 512 wavelengths that they use. This was an invention that came out in like the year 2000, a little bit after that. And it allows the light to be split up like a prism, and each color on that frequency, that color of light, carries the same amount as what one strand of fiber used to carry before wavelength vision multiplexing, which is what it's called, came into being. So there's so much more capacity than people are using now that it's going to be for at least another 50 years. And if some new technology comes along, like supposedly there's going to be a hollow core fiber, which essentially gets you to the speed of light, actual speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, through the fiber, whereas having glass fiber cuts it almost in half. But if you ever got to the point where you were saying, well, we want to use hollow core fiber, well, you just put it right in the conduit. You just get the other fiber in there and just add some new. So, and of course, that's going to be expensive when it first comes out, so you get another 50 years before it's common. So I don't think you really have to worry that you're making investment in obsolete technology. Certainly the switching is going to change. Same thing with the radios that go on the towers, every 5 years, because of improvements in the technology and the weathering on the towers, et cetera, you got to replace the gear there. Same thing with switches. Typically what you do is just have to put in another circuit card to add another 100 or 200 circuits. And then eventually you replace the whole thing just like an automobile. But the fiber itself is in the ground and it's pretty much good forever. The towers too. Towers out in the county that are probably 50 years old. So you don't have to worry about that, I don't think.
How near would you have to live to one of those towers to take advantage of it?
Well, you probably some more practical experience in the area, but I would say 5 to 10 miles, depending upon topology.
Yeah, that's good. Yep.
If you would have actually, we did a study in, as I think I mentioned, in Marathon County in Wisconsin. We actually addressed the issue of 5G because we know people ask. It would take 4,000 towers to provide the facility for 5G because you might get a half-mile transmission out of that. Which is good for fixed wireless in an urban area, but not so great out in the country where you got to put in a tower every half mile. But, so as long as you got the right technology in the right place, and we think we're in a good position to be able to, should be in good shape.
Thank you very much for kickstarting this process. I mean, those in the un- or underserved areas, help cannot come soon enough. And in that, wondering, is there a communication or like an email distribution list that some of us can get on to stay in touch with? If you've got some like value target areas throughout the county that I'm sure you'll be kind of prioritizing certain areas, it would just be nice to kind of know when help is officially on the way, when some of us in the bubbles can.
We are going to have a Wright County website that talks about, the broadband efforts that we're going to be undertaking.
We already have a webpage dedicated to broadband.
But it's not just us, it's also going to be the ISP providers. I mean, the county's not going to be providing you internet connections. It's going to, as Matthew said, work with those providers to try to get it to those places.
Right.
So we can only work as fast as other places, other companies will work with us.
My question is, how do those of us who have terrible service stay in tune with the progress that's happening across the county to help fill those gaps? And how do we know when and if help may be coming and the more specific on that?
Well, like Elizabeth said, there is a web page on a county website that will have updated information.
Oh, is that coming or is it already there?
It's already there.
Okay.
Right
And that's
now-
where this survey will be posted. And we'll also, usually when we post something, we put it in our news section of the website and it gets posted on social media as well.
Which also reminds me, you can go to the county website and you can sign up for information, agendas, highway information, park information, whatever you have interest in. And anytime anything is pushed or published to that webpage, it will send out information to you saying, this has just been put out. You can click on it and get additional information. But I do want to caution you guys that, as Matthew said, this is not going to be a sprint. It's going to take time. Because you got to remember, we're dealing with government.
So noted.
This is a study we just did for St. Croix County across the river. And this is the wireless. What we did was we analyzed the existing towers, towers that needed to be improved in some way because they had a lot on them or they weren't. And then new towers, which are the ones in yellow. So we diagrammed all of that and they're all connected, interconnected. And if all of those towers are in position and operating, then this is the coverage that you could expect to get from those towers. And probably similar to what Meeker is offering, somewhere in the range of 25, 50, maybe even higher, depending upon the year. So if you're familiar with St. Croix County at all, this is a river. This area is all built up. The eastern portion is all rural. So the system was designed to improve the fixed wireless connection in the rural areas. Now, there are probably going to be some places in there that are in valleys. I don't know whether you use community poles where you have a tower, a tall tower, and if there are a lot of trees or if they're in a valley, you put a 70-foot utility pole up. So you have the big tower shoot to the little tower, and then you have the fiber coming off the little tower. Possibly you might have some wireless instead of fiber, depending upon the location. But there are ways in a well-designed system for being able to use the wireless assets and connect to a large number of people. I expect something similar will be in this plan. Are there any other questions?
You'll be in the white spot over there, Jen.
Pardon me?
Just letting Jen know that she'll be in the white spot.
And just so everybody knows,
This
one of
one's
the
not here.
one of the requirements of Arp funding is that the end user speed has to be 120. So 100 download, 20 upload. So to spend Arp money, I've got to show that you get that on the back end.
Yep.
For what that's worth.
Yes, sir.
I believe this was asked earlier, but appreciate the Meeker Co-op guys coming. What, is there any other SP people here?
Yes.
Representatives?
Yep.
I'm from Arvin. I'm here. Don't have any residential people. A lot of fighters. We do over 350 schools. We do lots of the towers, so I could probably comment on that. And we also work with other providers. A lot of our fiber, what you were talking about 5-10 years ago, really, we didn't do any residential. So we have a lot of fiber. We have 14,000 miles. All we put down here is fiber. I've done quite a few projects in the area, not for Wright County itself, but Arvin does manage. We are really familiar. Last 4 years. But yeah, I'd be happy to work with. You're one of the first meeting factor big league. I look here and go on.
We also have another rep in the back.
I'm from Extra Time Technologies. We are a fixed wireless company that is in and around the Wright County area. I have a cabin over in the South Haven area, so I know exactly what those people have been going through, not having decent internet. I've been with Extra Time for 13 years. We also do have a fiber approach that we're working on in higher density areas like development.
Keep that way broadband. So we're provider Scott County was operating about 1,500 fiber. Total on vertical asset, American Tower, Crown Castle, any other vertical asset we can take. Just to give you some hope, and we're still dealing with government, but under the last round of care, we deployed 31 towers. So the southern half of Scott County, all of this in 3 months. Things can move fast with fixed wireless. We do 100 by 40 at the state.
What do you mean, 100 by?
So it does within the guidelines.
Now remember, these guys all work for somebody.
Not
So
us.
don't take it out on them, because they have to deal with somebody higher up that makes a major decision, so.
You know what, to that point, I'm Zach with Telecom, or it's over here, it's the Mafia. I've been to a lot of these meetings, this is incredibly productive, a lot of chairs in here are represented by red dots on that first
What was that?
I understand that. And question that you,
Oh, okay.
you're actually, are they unserved going to be taken?
I went from all this.
We only service in this county, Howard Lake, in that area. We do have fiber assets on the corner of the counties, and just a project over in West Hennepin County. Close to a lot of red dots there, so talk to, but happy to listen. Like, it costs a lot of money to build these networks, so we have to do it. Great meeting, been doing thousands of these.
Yeah,
How do we go about getting all these people's phone numbers to see?
We have one more
They're
provider
not
in the
trying to
back,
hide. They
Melissa.
came out here, I'm sure that they'd be willing to give you their number.
There's one more back.
Yeah.
Sorry, came in late. I'm Melissa. How everyone.
and then long-haul fiber route.
Oh, and real quick, Melissa came to us. They were doing a project. She wanted to know if we would support them. Absolutely. We'll support anybody that puts in broadband. They lost their bid. What was the winning bid speed rate, Melissa?
Well, so we did apply for a grant, Minnesota Board last year by a provider who,
Yeah.
so then our grant was not.
So when we went with 120, we were beat out by 25.3, which is absolutely ridiculous. 25.3 gets you nothing. But that's why I need you yelling at your congressman, telling him that that is completely unacceptable. The fact that a grant won at a speed that is a pittance is completely ridiculous. And that's where we can't do anything. The grants come from higher up. We need somebody else telling them that's stupid, because that's the technical definition.
So we need Tom Emmer here?
I'm just saying, get the brother on speed dial.
I want to add one thing to that, and all providers pick their own thing, that one of the challenges we have as providers is that providers over the years have overseen what they move their costs. So there's a challenge there that we have to work with the Commissioner's office and other entities to make sure that we make the justification that no, these areas aren't truly underserved. Providers over the years have said, no, we offer that level of service, not eligible for any type of program. So there's a lot of stuff for us to work through too. Like Connie said, as far as the ARP dollars go, they need to make sure they justify areas are underserved. So that's how they get eligible. Those funds are eligible. There was an audit or something like that in order to take place with the county. So that's why you board USDA, RDOF, all those dollars, all those programs of theirs have to meet justification. So that's another challenge we have. We have to do due diligence in the area to actually surveys really help, because then we can say, well, so-and-so says they do this for service in this area, but they don't. It's all a big process. There's a lot of moving parts, and so patience is key. And I know you guys have probably been patient for a long time, but it's not a unique right now problem. It's all throughout the whole United States. But this is, like everyone's kind of said tonight, this is a perfect day. It's a really good first step to get providers are engaged now. People know what's going on. Current providers will up their. There's a really.
I also really can't give enough thanks to Elizabeth Carrolls. She was the one, she's aptly named because she corralled all the providers and all the stakeholders, and we had about 30 online conferences over the space of about 3 weeks. And it was very well organized, and one right after the other. It does not work that way every place, believe me. So that's really a big help.
Yeah, you don't want to cross Elizabeth. I did it once. I walk with a limp.
Jeff, there's a question right there.
Yes, sir.
Where we live on Highway 25 south of Mountain Rose, and we have hidden stream. It's okay, but is there one a source that somebody can call to see what's available for a particular address? Well, some people might not have anything, like people might have 2 or 3 sources.
Well, that's exactly the slide I showed you earlier. We did the service providers analysis, which shows by zip code the services that are offered there and what percentage of the community takes them. Now, that does not necessarily guarantee that because a provider or several providers provide fiber in that zip code, that it goes by your house. But it does indicate that it is in your zip code.
There are also numerous websites, Broadband Finders, the one I like to use. We will make sure that's on the Wright County website, so that if you go to the website and type in your address, it'll tell you the different things. It'll tell you what's available, then you have to go to the individual providers and check your specific address. But it tells you in general what's in an area.
What broadband?
I believe it's Broadband Finder, but I will put it on the Wright County website for you.
The state of Minnesota Office of Broadband has one. It's an interactive map. You can just put in your address, and it'll bring up and show you all of the providers that say they can.
And it's fairly accurate.
I
She
do
did a
agree.
very good job to try to
Say
keep that
97%.
I agree.
Are those speeds that are?
The speeds aren't accurate, but the providers are, I would say.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I think it's been very productive. All hope is not lost. So stay tuned, and we'll continue our work, and we certainly had great cooperation from the county. So we think it'll be a successful project. So keep up the faith. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
There you go, boss.